This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and this week's episode once again comes from a panel Q&A at our recent Brewers Retreat at Dogfish Head in Milton, Rehoboth Beach in Lewis, Delaware. I'm actually recording this intro from Cincinnati while on the road yet again, filming video classes that are all access subscribers will see early next year. It's kind of hard to believe the retreat was just last week, but I am absolutely relishing the opportunity to relive the experience through these podcast episodes because honestly, it's just an experience that I did not want it to end. The panel discussion we recorded for this episode focuses on New England style IPA with direct fire questions from retreat attendees and panelists Steve Parker of Fidens, Kelsey McNair of North Park, and Scott Janish of Sapwood Cellars offer up thoughtful perspectives on everything from haze stability to hop choices and gravities and contemporary New England style IPA. It's a cool conversation. It's one I think you'll enjoy. You'll learn from it. One note before we get started, next week's episode will appear a day early on Thursday because you know what time it is. It's time for our annual Best in Beer magazine issue and podcast episode. Joe Stang and I will walk through the notable results of our annual reader survey, along with our editor's picks for the best 20 beers in 2024, and another marathon episode next week. And then the following week, we'll keep the Best in Beer vibes going with the Critics List episode where Joe, Kate, Bernat, and Stan Hieronymus join me together to walk through their favorites of the past year, their personal favorites. It's a fun magazine issue. I'm excited to share those highlights with you on the podcast. Before we jump into today's conversation, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take my word for it.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5 barrel pub system up to our production brewery, we've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
That's right. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is excited to now offer 2 to 4 week lead times on all in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers and seamers. These models are available in 100 to 300 can per minute filling speeds and are built with a focus on scalability and low dissolved oxygen pickup. This special lead time is only while supplies last, so send them an email at contactus@probrew.com or call them at 262-278-4945. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you may have heard of Old Orchard, but have you heard of their newest flavors? Berry Blend, Blood Orange, Lemonade, and Tart Cherry are the latest additions to their lineup of flavored craft juice concentrate blends. Old Orchard's R&D team can also formulate custom blends unique to your needs. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Now, on to our New England style IPA discussion from the Brewers Retreat. Some quick introductions. Why don't you start down there, Scott?
Yeah, so it's Scott Janish, co-owner of Sapwood Cellars in Columbia, Maryland, so about 2.5 hours from here. So this is a quick journey for me.
Steve Parker, co-founder of Fidens.
All right. Kelsey McNair. I'm the founder, head brewer of North Park Beer Company in San Diego.
In the last panel discussion, we talked a lot about Kelsey while he wasn't here in the room. So he's going to have to listen to that one to hear all the references to Kelsey and Kelsey's method mentioned by you-know-who. Maybe we'll start off with a general big question. We're going to try to keep this one more New England, East Coast focused on IPA because we've got some great folks here doing that. Although I should say geographically, we've got East and West Coast represented in their approach to making New England style IPA. And we'll call it New England style, right? I mean, we're going to go with Sam Richardson's preference on this. He hates calling it East Coast. He loves calling it New England, or hates even calling it just hazy. Let's talk about, we've had panel discussions on this before. Steve and Kelsey have been part of that. But Scott, when you think about New England style hazy IPA today, how has this evolved over the last 2 or 3 years? From your perspective, as someone who's been watching closely process ingredients and approach to New England style IPA.
I think it's kind of moved towards more of a balanced beer. I think early on it was, no kettle hops. We're doing all dry hopping, and I think for me, at least, when you're dry hopping really heavily, not using anything in the kettle, it's a very kind of flabby taste and just doesn't really carry through well. It's not very balanced. That's where it gets real kind of aggressive, I think, in the finish. And now I think, at least what we're trying to do is, load up the whirlpool quite a bit, really push as many hop compounds as we can get into the fermenter as possible, and really have that like hop saturated flavor that goes with that heavy dry hopping to have more of kind of a balanced beer. I think that's a little bit where it's moved, or there's been a little shift, but.
Kelsey, if you take a West Coast, you were making hazy and New England style IPA on the West Coast. How do you find, but you also collab with a lot of East Coast brewers. How do you find points of difference between what you do and what your audience wants in Southern California, as compared and how that relates to the bigger world of hazy New England style IPA?
Well, I think that bitterness is an important factor there, where, come from an area that geographically had a preference for West Coast IPAs, with a pretty assertive amount of bitterness. And, we've wanted to keep that intact in some form. And where we started with the style was a little bit too aggressive, I would say. And where we've, gone over time is to, keep a small bittering charge in there and drive a lot more of the bitterness from the dry hopping. And so, that's been our approach. And as we've done a lot of collabs, we've, kind of learned that seems to be what other brewers are doing as well. Kind of what Scott was saying, like we started off at a place where we weren't loading up the whirlpool and we do that now. But yeah, I think that the preference is largely just driven by, how we're putting those beers together and keeping that bitterness is a important piece.
Steve, for you, how have things evolved over the last 2 or 3 years, and how have you, watched consumer preferences start to, maybe change a little bit, or even your own tastes as trying to lead some of those consumer tastes? How has that impacted both ingredients and process, just in a broad sense?
I think like what Scott was saying about that balance is super important. The way that we make them, kind of the preference of our customer base is to have that little more of like a sweetness to it. And I think with that sweetness, if you don't have that bitterness or that hop charge to balance it, it can be kind of one note. We noticed, with us still, like we've gone all over the range with finishing gravities, and when the beers finish a little higher, people tend to be like, that batch was really good. When we try to go like a little bit lower and they're like, so we've definitely been, our gravities have been, because we kind of started low, like with our finishing gravities. So we've kind of bumped everything up. And also I think a big thing that's changed also is color of the beer. If you look back at this style, let's say 8 years ago, it had a darker color. I think today, people want to see that yellow, that vibrant color. So I think that's something that we've had to adapt to and change to some of our recipes. So
it's like Henry says, the kids love their Play-Dohs. We have questions out here. Don't let me ask all of these questions. I'm sure you guys have some questions.
Is the distinction primarily hopping techniques, or is it a grain bill issue or yeast combinations? For the distinctions between New England and West Coast? The grain bill is typically the same, or similar, I should say?
No. Kelsey, I'll let you speak to the West Coast.
For us, I've taken the approach, with all of our IPAs, whether it's a hazy IPA or West Coast, to try and eliminate as much malt complexity as possible. I'm trying to build layers and layers of hops and just have a supporting background element. And so, we use a low-colored Pilsner malt as our base malt for any IPA generally. We're not adding in a lot of character, heavy malts at all. And then on the hazy IPA side, then we're layering in some adjunct malts that are also very light in color. We tend to favor oat malt. We don't use a lot of flaked wheat or flaked oats, and that's just my preference. I really like the flavor of malted oats as far as building that backbone. But once we get away from that, it's like the hopping techniques are very similar. But yeah, I mean, and like Steve said, we're always going for a very pale, low colored, light colored malt base, just to try and really not have a heavy saturated malt character in either of those styles.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we still use two-row in all of our hazies. There's most of the brewers that I talk to, we're kind of like, there's only a few of us left, I think. We had to balance. We do add some Pilsner now to help with that color. I also found, like, depending on like what you're making, what hops you are using affects the color as well. So if we're using hops that I know don't drive the color the way I like it, we go more Pilsner heavy than two-row. Then with our West Coast, it's all Pils malt. So like for our base malt for our hazies, like two-row, some Pils. We use chip malt in every hazy, and I use flaked oats. Pretty simple base though.
Steve, you just said hops that change the color of your beer. Tell me about that.
We have found that certain hops give me the color that I look for. So like for us, for example, Nelson, Citra, any New Zealand hop that gives you that beautiful color. Some hops.
What is that beautiful color?
That beautiful, vibrant yelloorange orangey. The thing about this beer is these styles of beers, I think if it's too dark, it looks off-putting. It looks oxidized. And people are like, oh, this is oxidized. And I'm like, no, it's just darker. But so we really changed that. We've hops that like Mosaic, Simcoe to a degree, Strata, I find do not give me the color if I just use them by themselves. Or if I do use them by themselves, we'll use an all Pils base.
And that's probably more of how much haze those hops can throw, which
Correct.
changes that overall look in the end, which the color is changed by the amount of haze.
Right.
And so Galaxy and Nelson and those just tend to throw more haze, which affects the color.
So Bill Campbell, brew in Pittsburgh, PA. So I use Maris Otter and Pale Ale for my hazies or New England style, and I get that sweetness, from the Maris Otter. It gives it a good balance, mash in like 156. But I guess I'm thinking about, because I like that pop color, and I think everybody does, but have you ever done like a taste comparison? Because people really like that taste with the Maris Otter malt. You get the pop, and it's definitely darker, because I've had comments, people saying, hey, your beer, your hazy or your New England's dark. Maybe that's the way it used to be, or but I guess that's the question. Have you ever done a taste comparison? I know the look's different if you use maybe all Pilsner malt, and if you do use all Pilsner, do you mash in lower, make it drier, or do you try to mash in higher temperature?
We've actually done this quite a bit at Fidens. We've made like a beer without Pilsner, or the mix of two-row and Pilsner, and I always lean towards that two-row and Pilsner balance, because we just did a beer, Evan Price from Green Cheek. We did a collab with him over the summer where he took my recipe. Basically, I gave him an open book. I gave him everything. And he made a Fidens style beer, he called it. And so he was tasting it, and it's like what he said was like, it's like cake batter or vanilla frosting. And ever since he said that, like when I taste that two-row in the hazy beer, it does give it, or that combination, it gives it like a, what's the word? Like, let's take our beer Jasper, which is all Citra. When I taste that, it's like a orange Julius type vibe, or that like orange ice cream vibe. When we do the all Pilsner, it's just like how Kelsey was saying. It's just, you just really just taste the hop, what you're getting. So we have done it. I think the mouthfeel is better with the two-row than the Pilsner, in my opinion. We used to use what's the other one? Maris Otter, then Golden Promise. We used Golden Promise when we first opened in almost all of our beers, and I pulled away from it because of the color. But as far as mash temperature, it would be depending on the style of beer that we're doing, is usually the same. The grain bill won't really affect that for us.
Scott, how do you approach malt flavor in a way that helps complement hops in the IPAs that you design?
I'm kind of with Kelsey. I try to stay away from it. It's really we're trying to pull so many levers to get as much hop aroma and taste and all that. And I think malt just kind of can get in the way a little bit. So we're doing mostly same kind of thing. We do a blend of two-row and pale. We use chip malt in most of our beers as well. And then little malted wheat or oats. And we tend to do malted rye if we're doing more of like the New Zealand hops. It seems to pair really well. And that's pretty much our base for all of our hoppy hazy beers.
Hi, Joaquin Lopez from Cerveza Fortuna, Guadalajara, Mexico. So do you still do the biotransformation side, or you just dry hop everything? Or you still do fermentation and addition of hops?
So biotransformation, the way I feel about biotransformation is I want it that we do I want that in our whirlpool. So we go heavy, like 2 pounds per barrel in our whirlpool, and try to push as much of that into the fermenter for that interaction with the yeast right off the bat. But we don't dry hop until the beer is done. So we'll ferment everything at 72, and then we'll soft crush it down to like 65, and then dry hop once the beer is finished. So our biotransformation is kind of in that earlier process.
Nice, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're the same. It's hard to harvest yeast and do things like that if you're active, throwing in hops active fermentation. I tend to think that the dry hop character is more aggressive at those warmer temperatures too, and I think that can carry through. We still dry hop everything extremely cold, so we're 34 degrees in all of our dry hops. But it's to us gives us more of we don't have a centrifuge, we're trying to like keep those aggressive notes down, and hop creep is less of a chance at colder temperatures. The enzymes aren't active, and but if you're dry hopping that cold, you have to be very aggressive on getting the hops back up into the beer, because they're going to want to settle out very quickly. So we have to do pretty aggressive rousing with high flow regulator and blast from the bottom a couple times, and then it's like a two day contact time cold, and then start dropping.
Yeah, we're on the other end of that. So all of our dry hopping is done warm, and as far as biotransformation is concerned, we used to, like I mentioned earlier, didn't really load up the whirlpool very much, and now we are. Our kettle doesn't like 2 pounds per barrel. I would love to do that, but it doesn't work. So 1 pound per barrel is about the most that we can get away with. And I've talked about this on the podcast a bunch, but we do use flowable hop like Dynaboost or Incognito as a knockout hop addition, where we'll cast out some wort at our whirlpool temperature, which is 170, and then we'll load in the flowable into the fermenter, and then finish our knockout at a place that gets the tank at the right temperature to pitch. We use Imperial Juice is our preferred Hazy IPA yeast, and we'll take that up to 73 toward the end of fermentation, when there's about 25% of attenuation left to go. The day that we're able to pull yeast out is the day that our first dry hop goes in. That's usually a cryo charge, so we are getting some of that there. But we'll let the tank sit at 73 until it's time to crash. So any additional dry hops that go in at that point are all done at that temperature, and we might eke out a half to 1 degree Plato at that point from when we added the first dry hops. And we try and crash the tank pretty quickly after we've finished our dry hops. There is yeast doing work during all of that, so I feel like we are continuing to develop more, biotransformation type of characteristics throughout the duration of the dry hopping.
So sticking with dry hopping, you guys recirculate your hops?
We do. Some of that is, just out of necessity. Our tanks are all a 3-to-1 aspect ratio, so they're very tall. We don't get great extraction just dropping hops in the cone or in the top and letting them settle out. So most of our newest tanks are outfitted with a tangential port on the upper body, so we can come out of the cone and then go into the upper port, and it creates a whirlpool in the tank. And so, we'll run that for a very short duration. That's like 15 minutes for 15 barrels. But it does get all the hops in suspension. And then usually the next day, if we pass a VDK test, we're crashing the tank.
We do not rouse the tank. I kind of like the soft, gentle approach when approaching these beers. So we'll dry hop in smaller quantities over multiple days. We found when we first did it, if we loaded up the dry hop, it would just sink, and then we were just almost getting like pure pellets out of the bottom. So when we did smaller charges, we got better extraction. We also shut our tanks a little bit early to build some natural carbonation. I don't know if that does anything in my mind. I think it might a little. So that could help. But no, we don't rouse them.
Yeah, after just brewing a beer with Steve at his place and learning about his process, we tried to do a little bit of that on our own and did like a 60-degree dry hop, which for us is pretty warm, obviously. And we have a hop doser that sits at the top of our tank. I'm sure you guys have similar stuff now. Homebrew gear now is way above what it was when I was doing it. But the doser, ours is a 22-pound hop doser, and when we open it up, it seems like everything just boom, they just drop right to the bottom. And so I think there's probably something to what you're saying. If you're going to do it warmer, but you're spunding a little, you have built-in carbonation, that's probably helping keep those pellets or encouraging them to stay up in the beer.
We'll get back to more of the direct fire Q&A in a minute, but first, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. Perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they've got a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-star chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. Also, seam defects caused by minimal overlap may not be immediately apparent, but they can become problematic during distribution, leading to leaky pallets. Just because you're not experiencing leaks at your facility doesn't mean you're entirely safe. RSS Macklin offers training to help you understand not only what's happening with your can seams, but also what you can do to fix it. Their comprehensive training ensures that you're equipped to identify and make proper corrective actions before they escalate. Visit them at rssmacklin.com. That's rssmacklin.com, or email service@rssmacklin.com. Now, back to the Q&A.
Hey guys, my name's Tommy Chimino. I'm the owner of Brewery 33 in Riverton, New Jersey. Mine's more of a technical question. We've been operating for almost a year now, and since opening and operating on our new system, we have not been able to maintain a haze suspension in some of our beers. We've done everything from changing the pH in the mash. We've done whirlpooling at 170 degrees, biotransformation, hop additions, so on. What's the trick? What are you guys doing in the process? And have you ever had a problem where you've done a beer and 2 weeks after kegging and you're pouring it, it's now a clear beer?
We have never had that.
It must be me, man.
I mean, it could be like, this question's been asked to me quite a bit, and the first thing I always say is like, what are your dry hopping rates? A couple brewers I know that were asking me, and they told me their dry hopping rates, and I was like, that's just too low. Water profile could have something to do with it. I don't know, because I don't really want to say grain bill, because we've made beers that are all 2-row, and I've gotten great haze. So I don't know. That's I really don't know what to say.
Yeah, I think he hit the nail on the head with the dry hopping rate. And we did one beer as an experiment as we were starting to delve into the cold side flowable to really push some intense flavor and aroma. And in one beer we cut our T90 dry hop from like 4 plus pounds per barrel, up to 5, sometimes 6, down to 2, and we used a ton of flowable in this beer, and it just did not have that deep turbid color that the guest is expecting, but the beer tasted amazing. So it was like, well, I mean, conceptually this is cool, but it's not checking the boxes for the people who want this beer. And so we ended up kind of taking that saturation level of the flowable and just added our normal amount of dry hops, and it looked way more on point and was killer just because it had so much hop character in it at that point. So it's I definitely think it's that. I also would ask what yeast strain you're using.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I mean, Omega's done some research into that, and they have like haze positive, haze neutral yeast strains now, and so I think it is just a combination of a lot of factors. I mean, we have a hard time making when we try to do a West Coast IPA, we have a hard time clearing it up. And so I whenever I get that question, I'm always kind of amazed by that. But the yeast strain is a huge thing. The dry hop load and the types of hops, like we were saying earlier, certain varieties will throw more haze.
Like what?
Galaxy is a big
Southern
one for us.
Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Southern.
Polyphenol load is. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I did a Galaxy Smash, and it was hazy when we did it. We kegged it. 2 weeks it fell out. But we just have not had success in maintaining that.
What's your dry hop rate?
Yeah, the hop rate is low compared to what you're pitching there. You're saying 1 to 2 pounds per barrel. We're 10 barrel system, so we're probably doing a half to a pound per barrel. So we're probably under pitching in the whirlpool, but
What's your dry hop? Dry hop
rate, we're usually adding 3 pounds into the fermenter after fermentation, like day 3, day 4 fermentation.
That's it?
No, we'll do a second hop addition after that. Usually, we'll do a hop addition day 2 for biotransformation. That's usually a 2 or 3 pound hop addition.
That's part of the. That's probably part of the issue right there.
We're not adding enough hop.
The earlier you dry hop into active fermentation, the clearer the beer will end up.
Say that one more time.
So the earlier during fermentation, if you're doing active fermentation dry hopping, that'll actually lead to a clearer beer.
Okay.
Again, this was another thing that Omega tested, and they were finding that if they're dry hopping on day 1 of active fermentation, the beer was clearer than not dry hopping at all. So I mean, they're clearing up a beer by doing that day 1, day 2, day 6, 7 towards the end of fermentation led to more stable haze.
Okay.
So again, it is just a combination of like all these different factors that can kind of lead to the stable haze.
Kelsey, I believe you initially referenced the 170 degree whirlpool. I mean, could you kind of walk me through that as a home brewer?
Yeah. I mean, the thing you have to, everybody's scared of, things getting contaminated. And, I mean, what we do on a commercial scale is, we have a cold liquor tank. So, we have readily available 36 degree water. We will do a concentrated boil. So our typical boil is like 18 barrels. We'll boil down to 17, which takes an hour. And then we'll top that kettle back up to 19. And that takes us, and there aren't a lot of hops in the kettle at this point, but that'll take us down to about 196. And then we'll hook up a recirc loop through our heat exchanger and go in through the whirlpool arm and drop the kettle temperature down to 170 before we're adding, our hops. And the thought process there is, one, we're trying to get out of the DMS zone. We don't want to be sitting hot in the kettle for an excessive period of time. We're still at a level where pasteurization units are in good check, at 170. So, you having cold water that hasn't even been boiled is not really something to be too concerned about, as long as you're not driving your kettle temperature down to a range where you're no longer in that pasteurization area. So, I mean, it is something you could absolutely do, on the homebrew scale. If you do have a heat exchanger, or, you have an immersion, chiller or something like that, you can definitely start running it, take it down to a point, turn it off, but you don't want to go too far, just because at that point, you are getting out of that pasteurization range. But yeah, that's when we add the bulk of our hops at that point, is when we've got that kettle temperature down. Yeah.
So what's the time frame? The boil is generally...
It's a 60-minute boil. And then, it might take us 20 minutes, to get the kettle down to 170. But it pretty instantly goes down to, that 194, 196 range. And then we're just trying to not isomerize alpha acids, with the hop addition that's going into the whirlpool. So I like to make sure that I'm establishing my bitterness, at the start of the boil, with deliberate hop addition, and then not getting additional bitterness from the later addition. And that way we don't have to focus so much on the alpha characteristics of what's going into the whirlpool. We can be more focused on the flavor and aroma character that we're trying to, establish.
Yes. Bittering hops. Do you do anything in the boil? And then the next question, top note, like terpene or something like that. Do any of you use those?
We do a 60-minute addition of about 10 to 15 IBUs in every beer, and I have not used any of the terpenes or anything.
We do. We don't do anything in the bitter. We always mash hop our beers, so we're doing about 2 pounds and 10 barrels for mash hopping, which gives you a little bit of IBUs, but not a lot. And that's more of a stability, complex metals, get iron content down. On that same realm, we've been experimenting with. There's some research on like pomegranate extract, and how effective it is at removing metals. It's like 90% or something like that in that area that removes metals that can cause oxidation down the line. We were doing that in all of our beers, but we've since noticed it's been adding, a couple SRM, even though it's only like 60 grams in 10 barrels. It was just getting a little darker, which, kind of what we were talking about earlier on using specialty malts and hazy styles. It just starts to look like dirty dishwater if you're getting too much color. And so we're just using that pomegranate now in like our lagers. And I think it does kind of help maintain like a fresh malty characteristic in those beers. And I think removing those metals is not something a lot of people think about, but it can have a taste impact. The taste threshold is pretty low on these. And most beers finish out close to or and mostly above threshold. That's more so with like specialty malts. And so we're trying to, if we're barrel aging, we're definitely using pomegranate extract. I think Mash Life is a new product that's essentially that. I think I'm not 100% sure if it's pomegranate or there's another compound that's used, but and then so we're doing all whirlpool hopping for our IBUs. 35 to 50 IBUs I think is kind of where we're at. But then there was talk on the previous panel about IBUs and how the number it's just kind of a number that you can use for repeating batches more so than having an actual. It's just hard to measure. There's too many. The IBUs doesn't account for the type of acid and they all have a different sensory bitterness component to it. So if we're really dry hopping heavy, I think it's important to stay lower on the IBUs because it just gets too harsh. And so that's kind of what you were saying. It's if you're cooling your whirlpool, the alpha acid isn't as important, and then you're looking more at aroma and which hops carry through better. So something like Idaho 7 or Rawaka is extremely good at carrying through in flavor.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same camp with Steve as far as what we are trying to shoot for in these beers. It's around 10 to 15 IBUs on paper.
Something that's interesting to me now that looking at some recent research is using older hops hot side. There's a lot of hop inventory out there, and you'll see flash sales for 2021, 2022 hops for pretty cheap. And, looking at papers that force age hops, the compounds we want in those beers are staying in the hops when they're forced aged hot, I think around like 80, 90 degrees. There's some oxidation of like myrcene, which is turning into like an increased level of draniol in aged hops, and that's one of those compounds we're trying to push hot side. So it's interesting to think about using just older hops like that for cheaper in the whirlpool.
Let's talk about polyphenols. This is an interesting, obviously necessary to create that haze and character. There's certainly hops that are pushing more of that. Obviously too much, and you then end up in that burn territory, the dreaded burn, or the don't drink it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's going to peak kind of thing that we also talked about at the earlier panel. How do you balance the need, in terms of what they contribute to that mouthfeel and also haze, but while also managing some of the downsides of polyphenols?
I'll start. Yeah, I mean that's the tricky thing, right? And that causes us to be meticulous about how I'm selecting the hops that we're going to use. Like I would never approach a beer and say, this is going to be single hopped with all Galaxy, at 5-6 pounds per barrel, because it's just going to shred your palate. It's going to be so aggressive and harsh. Because those just hit the palate with this intense grassiness when they're at that level. So something like that, we might, push that hop into a small fraction, which still expresses nicely at a lower rate, but we're going to pick other hops that don't do quite as much. But, just the polyphenol piece of the beer, it's what makes, those hazy IPAs have some more, gritty bitterness that's important to balance the sweetness that these yeast strains, that are typically used tend to leave behind. And so, without it, it's like it does get a little flabby, it gets a little too sweet, and just doesn't have the right, sort of arc of, when it's hitting your palate and just having those bitter sensations. So, yeah, I'd say, less is more on the Southern Hemisphere stuff, with the exception of some of the New Zealand varieties. But in particular, Australian hops, for me, are always super aggressive with the polyphenol character. So it's just, using less.
For us, the way I kind of approach it is I always want our beers to be very hop saturated, very hop forward, but be soft. I really love like a softness of it. So really it starts with water. Our water that we brew with is pretty soft. We don't add a bunch of salts to our water. We keep our total hardness of our water pretty low, almost like lagerish. There's a really good book out there when I was home brewing. It's called Brewing Lager Beer by Greg Noonan. And it talks about lagers, but there's like a section of the book that really dives into water and how your water can really affect whether your beer is going to have like a soft approach, be a little more aggressive. So the way we take it is just that little bit of softer water. I also feel that grain bills that are very high in adjuncts lead to a little more hop bite, which is why we don't go very high. We're probably 15 to 20% most of all of our hazy beer. Contact time of hops. Again, this is why we don't recirc, because, I'm kind of the belief that like these beers and these hops are so, easily they're just, they can just go away instantly. So we have to get very soft with the beer. Don't recirc. Contact time real short, 2 days, cold crash, get it off. And I think another one is pH. We have done beers. So our finishing pH is pretty low, and we keep it like our beers will finish out with our yeast strain. We'll finish out around like 4.3-ish, 4.2 before dry hop, and then if anytime it's over 4.4, we'll drop it down to like 4.3 with phosphoric acid, and then dry hop. We notice that when the pH is lower, the hops express differently. I get more of that fruit characteristic that I like. We have done beers where they finish higher in that 4.8-ish, 4.7 range. And to me, that's when I start picking up that bite from the hops, that almost like woody, grassy note. So that's how we approach it.
Yeah, we've done it's been a while, but I've just dosed some, heavily dry hop beers with acid to get lower pH, just to see kind of how I think of it in the glass, and it does seem like a little bit lower on that final pH can help that kind of round that beer out a little bit, and it won't be so aggressive. The big one for me for polyphenols is temperature. There's a little less extraction with the lower temperature, and then I think the research is like a 3 to 4 day peak on polyphenol extraction. So quick contact time can help with that. Biofine can help a little bit if it's a little aggressive, kind of help clean it up without, it doesn't clear up the beer, but it can help just make it a little more approachable. We go back and forth. Now we're trying not to use it. It seems like every time we have a process set, we then change it after trying someone else's beer or learning about their process. But that's what's so great about with these kind of events is to talk about this stuff.
I had a question. My name is Greg Meyer, and I'm like a big fan of the style. And you kind of mentioned earlier certain hops have to be blended with other hops, yet they give you a distinct taste. And I've had some amazing beers, and I guess a hop. I've always loved Citra, but I had a beer with the Zaka in it, and I guess I tasted it for the first time and it was kind of amazing, but then I find out there's very little of it in the beer. So I guess could you amplify more how you try to craft one of these new hops, and maybe it won't actually be what people are used to experiencing? I mean, it's going to be a new flavor. I mean, that's kind of my question, is more about how you manage these exotic new hops that get a different taste.
I think it's just trial and error at first. I mean, the for us, if I have something new, I usually blend it with Citra because we know Citra in and out pretty well. But it's kind of like I think after a while, and you've used these hops, and you kind of understand what hops will go where, what hops will work in what process. It's kind of like a chef, right? And I look at hops as like the seasoning of the food, and you don't want to overdo it with some, and some you can really overdo. Like I think Citra, you could just flood a beer with Citra, and I don't think it would really have any effect. Galaxy, on the other hand, it would be terrible. So it's just knowing the hops and knowing when to use them, the amount to use them. When new hops come, it's just getting them, rubbing them, smelling them. Look at the oil contents, and just kind of start with a little bit, because some hops, like you said, it was just a little bit of that hop in there. Like some hops are like, I call them accent hops, and they're not stars. They're not, you can't do a single hop with them, but they at 20% of the hop bill, they just add this beautiful note to the beer. So it's just brewing and finding out what hops that do that.
What I like to do is take keg off beer post fermentation, but before dry hopping, and then use that as a base to try new hops, and always do it like just a single variety of a new one, and with a pretty heavy hit, like 3 pounds and 2 to 3 pounds in 15 gallons, and just get a true sense of that hop. And then you can kind of think about it after that in terms of, okay, what I know about Citra, how would this work? Or same with, pick your variety. But I think that's rubbing and is great for an initial thought about a hop, but then how does that actually translate into the beer? Because sometimes that's surprising to me. Like I am a big fan of Idaho 7 Hot Side. I have a hard time trying to get it to work as a dry hop, even though I love the smell of it as a pellet.
Yeah. Similarly, we're not fractioning off, a keg and doing trials that way, but usually when there's a new hop that we want to check out, we make a lot of West Coast style Pilsners. Those beers for us end up getting dry hopped at about 2 pounds per barrel. And so it's a nice platform for a single hop because it's, kind of low on the malt side in terms of flavor. It's very clean, lagered, lager yeast, obviously. And so that's where we can kind of, see what something does all by itself. And so we've done that a bunch. And then if those things seem like they can stand alone in that format, then, maybe we'll use a much heavier hand in a hazy IPA. But yeah, a lot of times it is just, okay, that thing's a good accent piece. It's not going to be the star.
More in a sec, but first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties at Strata, Lorient, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropic strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. Also, if you appreciate the precision and craftsmanship of wood-aged craft beer, you've got to check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer this November. The 2-day festival and competition is the largest of its kind in North America, bringing in more than 150 of the world's top brewers to the heart of Chicago. Sample more than 350 one-of-a-kind barrel-aged beer, cider, mead, perry, from 13 style categories, and cheer on your favorite breweries as they compete for top honors in the nationally recognized competition. It's all happening at the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago, November 22nd and 23rd. Grab your crew and get your tickets now at fobab.com. That's FOBAB.com. All right, let's get back to the Q&A session.
You mentioned BioFind a couple minutes ago. Any of you using any type of like Clarity Firm or an enzyme like that to help remove gluten or anything like that in your hazies? And if so, have you seen any change in the end product as a result of using it?
We do not use it in our hazies. We've used it in our lagers. I've put it in some West Coast, but a very, very small amount. I actually got the tip from Andrew at Human Robot was the one that he informed me of this. And it's like, we just put I think it's like 10 milliliters for like a 7-barrel batch. And we got it tested and it came back. There's no gluten. I was pretty wild about it. But my head brewer, Anthony, he just went to England a little while ago for Hop City. And he was hanging out with the guys from Track Brewing, and they use it. And he said it tastes great. He couldn't tell any difference from it.
We'll use it in lagers, but we'll put it in pale ales, and those seem to be equally as hazy as some of our IPAs.
Yeah, we don't.
So like boil times seem to kind of be all over the board. It sounds like all three of you guys do like 60-minute boils for hazies. If so, is there a reason why you experimented with shorter boil times?
No, I have not. I'm a creature of habit, So 60. We do 60-minute. Yeah, I have some friends that I know have done 15-minute boils, and their beers have been all right. But I can't. I stay with 60.
You need time to clean out the mash tun.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, we've kind of stuck with 60. We have a direct fired kettle that rips, and so I generally don't want to boil any longer than that. But I also hate DMS, so I'm just trying to make sure that we're boiling sufficiently to not have that result.
Do you believe that stepped mash plays a good part in the hazes?
The question is about, does a step mash play a role in the stability of the haze?
I really don't have. We just do single infusion, single mash. We've never done that with hazy, so.
Yeah, same. We're single infusion.
Same.
Haven't tried it more than we did. Actually, I take that back. We tried it once, and we missed our steps because we have to do step infusions, and it was just kind of a disaster. So didn't try it again.
With using that much dry hop in the fermenters, what's your yield loss? Do you have an idea?
Listen, it's with this style, it's I mean, people like hops, and I feel that with this style, I think with the way this style grows is like brewers are just pushing it more and more and more and more. So it's, it's finding not good, I guess I would say. 7-barrel batch. If we're doing like a 7-barrel batch, we'll probably yield 50 cases off of 7-ish. It depends. Again, it kind of depends on the hop. New Zealand hops for us just don't want to drop that well. So transfers are terrible. But, I mean, it's kind of part of the game. We're lucky now. We're at the point where we buy a lot of hops and we can, get our price down good enough where it's not as much of a pain as it was. I actually I think our worst yields is West Coast because of the biofine layer. The biofine layer is a killer for sure.
Let's talk, as we've got one or two more questions max, but let's talk about using new flowable advanced hop products, layering on with more green matter hop products, and how you all balance those intensities, but also the texture, the haze contribution from that green matter, and are now currently today like balancing both of those, all of these products in various ways to come up with something that's compelling for people to drink.
Yeah, I mean, we're at North Park, we've been, a big proponent of using these advanced hop products, but usually, my thought process is, okay, cool, you've given me a new tool that I can add more, not I'm going to replace, this with that. And so, we're, like I mentioned, we're knocking out into Dynaboost or Incognito that's already in the tank. We do use a lot of concentrated pellets, cryo, we have been tinkering around with like Freestyle Hops has, their hop keef, which is sort of a distilled down concentrated flowable that we might add that during our recirculation step. We're just starting to tinker around with like the abstracts, quantum hop extract as another way to add more. So it's kind of taking that T90 base and then just trying to amplify, different points and just bring it up even more, just create more hop flavor and intensity.
Yeah. At Fidens, honestly, we are kind of T90 diehards. I like the advanced hop products. We use them more as like a accent. To me, we've done beers like our beer Jasper. We did one that was all Lupo Max and advanced hop products, and it just wasn't Jasper. It was kind of missing something. So that you definitely, if you're going to use it, it needs to be balanced. But we are pretty T90 heavy in everything. We do use hop keef in some beers, but that is just as like, hey, we want to just add an extra punch to this beer, so let's just put it in the bright as we're transferring it. The same with Hyperboost, which is Hyperboost, this new product, was 701, right? 701?
Yeah.
It was 701. We use that in the bright as well. It's super punchy. Really like that as well. But, we're mostly, stick with that T90. Just to me, it's like with us, with the sweetness of the beer, having that little bit of polyphenol bite that the T90s give, I think is kind of what it needs to balance out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You can't avoid using it. It's a big part of what makes those beers so good. And I'm with Kelsey too. It's not, a lot of times you'll get the sales pitch on these new hop products and it's efficiency. You get yield more, and it's like I get that, but like we're trying to wow customer, we're trying to wow people, and it's more like exactly what it's an addition. It's not a substitution. So we're still dry hopping it 4 or 5 pounds per barrel, and we want to use that. It's not a we're going to cut back on the dry hop charge. We've used experiment with all these as well, and it's for me it can be a price thing. I can really like the results, but at the amount I would need to use to get there, it would be kind of crazy. So like sometimes I'll put like the amount they should give you for like 10 barrels put in a half barrel keg, and I like the results, but it's like, wow, that's $350 per thing. And so if I was to scale that, it's just not practical. Abstracts is appealing. We just had a call with them, and they're going to make us some extract with our selected hops. So that's a little bit more fun. You're a little more connected to that, which I like. I think one box or like 50 pounds of hops gives you about a gallon of their extract, which is kind of amazing. It would take us a long time to use a gallon, I think, but so it's always just sometimes you can make beers that just don't make financial sense. That's not always but that's like a one-off kind of thing. And so it's a balance of how much is it going to cost and is it making the beer better?
All right, we've got to close here, but one last thought for all of the homebrewers here in the room. Biggest unlock for making better New England style hazy IPA. Maybe start with you, Kelsey. What do you think the biggest thing they should pay attention to is?
Gosh, I would say, it's really tough. It definitely comes down to that dry hopping rate, I think. I mean, if the beer's not going to shine in the way that you expect it to without a pretty massive hop charge. I mean, it's really important. It's what drives this style at the end of it. And it's not, careless dry hopping, but, just making sure that the contact time is, fairly short. So you're not over extracting the polyphenol characters, but just really focusing on the dry hop, the amount, and how you're treating it. That's the big thing.
I would say limit your oxygen as
You stole mine.
much as possible.
You stole mine.
I know. I was
That goes for every beer.
So when I first started home brewing, just doing that, just basic carboy, all this stuff, beer came out terrible. And then when I started doing closed transfers in home brewing, it was like night and day. So if you could figure out a way, closed transfers, limit the oxygen as much as possible, I think that's your biggest. It's hard to homebrew. It really is. It's hard.
This
to
style,
homebrew.
especially.
It's really hard to homebrew. So if you could limit oxygen, that's my number one thing. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I can add to it. I used to not spend a lot as a homebrewer on gear, but cold side would be the area I would spend more money if I was homebrewing. To do closed transfers, like you're saying, you can do everything right. You can have the recipe right. You can, have the best hops, but if you get oxygen at transfer on a hazy beer, it's just going to go downhill very fast. Consider using things like metabisulfite with your dry hops. I mean, anything you can do to keep that oxygen down. And I think we use about like a gram per barrel, something like that. So you can do the math. It's just an insurance. Like anything you can do is worth it for these.
All right, well, that is all we have time for. Thanks, Kelsey, Steve, and Scott. Thank you. We are going to head downstairs to the brew systems, break out into brewing groups, and we are going to start brewing some beer here at the Brewers Retreat. Thank you all. There it is, the second of our direct fire Q&A sessions recorded live with audience questions from our Brewers Retreat earlier this week at Dogfish Head. Thanks to these three brewers, as well as the other featured brewers like Vinny Schlurzo of Russian River, Jason Perkins of Allagash, Neil Fisher of Weldworks, Avery Swanson of Keeping Together, Henry from Monkish, Doug Reeser from Burial, Chris Johnson Green Bench, Scott Janis from Sapwood Cellars, and of course Sam Calagione, plus the amazing dynamic duo of Mark Safrick and Brian Selders from Dogfish Head, who provided crucial brewing support, and they're fermenting the beers right now. We'll be back next week with the Best in Beer episode. Stay tuned for that. I know everyone's on pins and needles to see what the results are from that. But as always, choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew offers 2 to 4 week lead time on in-stock rotary can fillers and seamers. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. 5-star chemicals cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley Yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. And check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel Aged Beer this November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago. It's a great time. I went last year, had a blast. Highly recommend it. Definitely put that on your calendar. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. It's not too late to make sure that you get our Best in Beer issue next Thursday as soon as it drops. Beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, support what we do. Thank you. Best in Beer drops on Thursday. Can't wait. Until then, cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.